There's a tomb in Hebron where 6 biblical patriarchs are buried: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. If these people were real, then the events surrounding them might be real too, and one of those events may have foreshadowed the arrival of Jesus thousands of years later.
Let's go back to Genesis chapter 22. We saw that Abraham is a historic person. If you don't believe he's a historic person, there's a tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. 6 people are buried there: Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. Do you think ancient people are stupid enough to bury 6 people that did not exist? So, when you look at the passage again, it's historical. Abraham and Isaac lived, and they are picturing the theological implication of what God would do in the future. But let's move on. Abraham said something very fascinating. He said God will provide himself as a sacrifice. For God to provide himself as a sacrifice, God got to be born. So, was God ever born? Well, in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, now remember, this stuff is documented in Dead Sea Scrolls 3,000 years ago. Can't make it up. We're just connecting dots for you to decide, okay? We're not telling you what to believe. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, it says this: the Lord himself will give you a sign. Like Abraham said, the Lord himself will provide. So in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, Isaiah says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child, and will give birth to a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel. Now, what does Emmanuel mean? For God to be sacrificed, he got to be born. Well, let's look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 22 and 23. And so when Jesus was born, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Exactly what Isaiah said. And that stuff is documented in Dead Sea Scrolls, 1,000 years BC. Now, what type of child would this be? Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 says this: for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. The government will be on his shoulder, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Look, Jesus was called Emmanuel, God with us. Isaiah prophesied that a child would be born that would be God with us. Where would that child be born? Well, let's look at Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And that verse says, but you, Bethlehem, Ephratah, though you're small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be the ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times, or from days of eternity. Would somebody who existed from eternity be born of a virgin in the town of Bethlehem that would be called God with us? The child is born. That's the human part of Jesus. The Son is given. That's the divine part of God. Was Jesus both God and man? Would God be born to be the sacrifice? And Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, all these passages that for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, the government will be upon his shoulder, and he will be called Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The son is given. That's the physical, that's a human part of Jesus through the Virgin Mary. The Son is given, that's the eternal part of God. The eternal God cannot be born, so he had to be given, the Son of God. But he's also called the Mighty God, Everlasting Father. That's where Jesus said that he and his Father are one. They're separate people, but they're one in purpose, essence, and nature. Kind of like water is a vapor, ice, and a liquid, so is God. God the Father is same substance, water, and Jesus same substance, but different people. So that's how you could kind of understand the eternal Son. Moving on, as far as confirmation for this information, during the days of King Hezekiah, well, there was something that was discovered in the year 1880. It's called the Shiloh inscription. And in 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 20, King Hezekiah dug a tunnel, and he wanted to bring water into the city. And the tunnel was about 1,800 feet long, and they started working from both ends, the Gihon Spring and the Shiloh Pool from Jerusalem. This was 2,700 years ago they dug this tunnel. And it's been there 2,700 years. However, in 1880, a kid went in the tunnel and he fell off the rock, and then he put his hand on the side of the wall to pull himself up, and he found markings that were from left to right. That's Hebrew markings. The tunnel's been in there. People have been in it many, many times, couldn't find this inscription called the Shiloh inscription. And here's what the inscription said. The axes were against each other, and while the 3 cubits left, the voice of one man called out to the other. There was a crack in the rock about 3 feet away. And on the day of the tunnel, the stone cutters struck each man's towards his counterpart, axe against axe, and flowed the water from the source of the pool 1,200 cubits. And the height overhead of the stone cutters was about 100 cubits. So these guys, 2,700 years ago, under King Hezekiah, they dig this tunnel to bring water into the city, and they met at a right angle. They didn't go straight from one end to the other. And the way they did it is they used acoustic noises 100 feet above to guide the stone cutters below the ground and pure rock to bring the water. When they met at that spot, they put the Shiloh inscription, which is what we just read. And the interesting thing is that Noel Friedman said this: "There's no explanation needed for this inscription. For all authorities agree it was written about 700 BC when King Hezekiah made a pool and a tunnel by which he brought water into the city to preserve them during a siege from the Gihon height. There was no explanation needed for this inscription. Everyone agreed it was King Hezekiah's inscription on the Shiloh tunnel. However, let's talk about Abraham, because we're talking about Abraham, we're talking about King Hezekiah and these prophecies that Abraham said that God would be born, that God would give himself as a sacrifice. And these 3 prophets, Isaiah, Hosea, and Micah, prophesied during the reign of King Hezekiah about God being born in Bethlehem of a virgin, and that he would go to Egypt. So let's talk about Abraham and Jesus for a second here. So in John chapter 8, verse 56, there's a very cryptic verse. Jesus said to the Jews, he goes, "Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and he was glad." When did Abraham ever see Jesus? If you go to Genesis chapter 14, there's a battle recorded between 5 cities and 4 cities. 4 kings against 5 kings in Genesis chapter 14. And the 5 kings that lost the battle are from the cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admar, Zeboim, and Bela. That's Genesis 14, verse 2. Now, Abraham's cousin Lot was at Sodom, so he got captured. So Abraham went and beat these kings up and delivered them. He beat these 5 kings, Sodom, Gomorrah. The kings that lost, he rescued them from Sodom, Gomorrah, Admar, Zeboim, and Bela against the other 4 kings in Genesis chapter 1. However, when he left the battle, he met a man in verse 18 of Genesis chapter 14. And the man was called Melchizedek, the king of peace. And he brought out bread and wine, and he blessed Abraham. Is that not crazy that Jesus called the Prince of Peace, but he's also the King of Peace? And so way before he was born, he goes, even before Abraham, I existed. And they go, have you ever seen Abraham? And so this is what's called theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of God before he was born, and he brings bread and wine to Abraham. That's kind of crazy right there, right? But if you don't like that, let me tell you what's really crazy. There's a tablet called Elba Tablet 1860. It was discovered in 1974 in the city of Elba by Mahini, Pablo, and Gabriela. And they found like 20,000 of these cuneiform tablets. They were baked, they were on a shelf, the palace burns down, and the fire baked the tablets, and they all left right in place. And so on tablet 1860, an expert, the guy who cracked Elabite writings, which are again, cuneiform writings in a different language. Their cuneiform writings, as we mentioned, are writings of like a wood screwdriver with a flathead, a piece of like a pencil with a flathead, and they would press that pencil into these clay tablets, and those would be the words, and then they would bake it, and that's what cuneiform writing's all about. And there are about 13 different languages. In Elba, they found these cuneiform writings, and the guy that cracked the Elbalite language, Giovanni Pittanio, he said, look, Elba Tablet 1860 says this, that Elba did trades with the cities of the plains, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, in the exact order of Genesis 14:2. The exact order, that very passage where it says Abraham delivered those 5 cities that lost that battle, that tablet records 4,000 years of history. In that verse, word for word, exact order, 4,000 years of recorded archaeological documentation confirming the information of Abraham and that battle. And right after that, he meets Melchizedek. Is that not crazy? So the point we're making is we're giving you archaeological confirmation for the association with Jesus and Abraham and Isaac, where a father would sacrifice a son. We're giving you archaeological confirmation for the existence of Abraham, despite his tomb with 6 patriarchs are in Hebron, despite the 20,000 Mari tablets that mention his name, despite Alba Tablet 1860, which, by the way, there's a controversy because of political reasons, but let's not get into that. Every piece of archaeology, some idiot will come up and say, no, that's not real. But when you put all this stuff together, it makes a chain that you got to say, hey, you know what? It's just a little bit too much evidence to doubt. So let me give you one last piece about that pool that King Hezekiah dug, the Shiloh inscription. Remember Isaiah and Hosea and Micah prophesied during the reign of King Hezekiah. However, Isaiah mentions in chapter 8, verse 6, the very waters of the pool. So can't you see, like, Hezekiah dug that tunnel and the water came to that pool? And Isaiah mentions it in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 6. And that is documented over 2,700 years. You cannot deny it. This stuff is recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls, documented. And there's not just one book of Isaiah. There's not just one book of Genesis, which are stories of Abraham. There are 24 copies of the book of Isaiah. There are 22 copies. It's not like one copy in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This stuff all confirms what we're telling you. But it's a fascinating concept that King Hezekiah dug that pool, that we found the markings of the workers in that tunnel that's been there 2,700 years. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah mentions the very pool and waters in chapter 8, verse 6. If he's right about that, he might be right about Jesus being born of a virgin, that a son would be given, that would be the mighty God, everlasting Father, and that he would be born in Bethlehem, and that he would die on a cross. He would be pierced, like it says in Zechariah 12:10. He would be pierced, and he would do this to show that he loved you. For our broken world, God sent his son so that we could be restored in friendship with him. You think about that.